He slid the check across the marble table. $100 million. Her name was already written on it. The ink was still wet. She looked at it. Then she looked at him, and she pushed it back. The most powerful man in the city had never been told no. Not by his board. Not by his rivals. Not by any court, in any country, where his money reached. But this woman, this quiet woman in worn shoes and a borrowed dress, she pushed back $100 million as though it were a glass of water. She did not want. And when she spoke, her voice did not shake, not even a little. What she said next made the billionaire's hands tremble for the first time in 30 years. Before we continue, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story. And tell us from where you are listening our story. Now start the story. His name was Victor Ashworth, and in the great city of Lagos, his name was spoken the way people speak about the weather. Not with admiration exactly, but with the understanding that it was simply a force one did not argue with. Victor was 51 years old. He stood tall in a way that had nothing to do with height, and everything to do with the way he had been taught. Since boyhood, that rooms belonged to him the moment he entered them. His suits were tailored in London. His watches were older than most marriages. His penthouse on Victoria Island looked out over the ocean on one side and over the city's glittering skyline on the other, as if even nature had agreed to arrange itself around his view. He had built his fortune in telecommunications. 30 years ago, he had started with nothing but a single borrowed office and a telephone that worked half the time. He had clawed his way upward with a hunger that impressed even the people he crushed on the way. Today, Ashworth Communications ran across 8 African countries. His face appeared in government buildings. Presidents took his calls. But beneath all of this, beneath the marble and the tailored wool and the ocean view, Victor Ashworth was a man carrying a wound he had never shown anyone. His wife, Adeus, had died 11 years ago. Not in tragedy, not in drama. She had simply been driving home from the market one Tuesday morning, and a truck had crossed the center line. The police report was 3 paragraphs. The funeral was attended by 400 people who had never eaten a meal with her. Victor had stood at the grave in his black suit and told himself to cry, and found that he could not. That absence, that inability to reach the grief, had lived inside him like a stone ever since. He had not loved another person since. He had tried. There were women, beautiful, accomplished women who understood the transaction and were comfortable with it, but none of them could fill the particular silence Ades had left. After a while, Victor stopped trying and began simply, more companies, more countries, as if scale could replace depth. The woman's name was Grace Okonkwo. She was 34 years old, and she lived in a 2-room apartment in Surulere with her mother, who was diabetic and could not climb stairs, and her younger brother Daniel, who was 17 and studying for university entrance exams, at the kitchen table every night because there was no other table. Grace worked 2 jobs. During the day, she cleaned rooms at the Continental Hotel on Lagos Island. It was 6 days a week, 9 hours a day, and she was fast and thorough. And the other cleaners respected her because she complained and she never took shortcuts. And she always remembered which guests had specific preferences, even when their names were never the same twice. At night, 3 evenings a week, she prepared and sold food from a small cart outside the church near her apartment: jollof rice, fried plantain, pepper soup. When the weather was cool, she made enough to cover rent, her mother's medication, and Daniel's school fees. There was nothing left after that. She did not expect there to be. What Grace had, in the place where other people kept their resentment, was a kind of quiet certainty. Not happiness exactly. Her life was too demanding for that soft word. But something firmer. A knowledge of who she was that did not require the confirmation of other people. She had never met Victor Ashworth. She had never expected to. The first mystery planted itself on a Tuesday. A guest at the Continental had left behind a leather portfolio. Grace had found it under the bed during turnover. Inside were documents, pages and pages of legal language she did not fully understand. But one name appeared again and again on those pages, and she recognized it because it was the name of her own childhood neighborhood, and the words beside it said, Demolition, Resettlement, Phase 2. Grace had stared at those pages for 4 minutes. Then she had placed the portfolio carefully in the lost and found, the way she was trained to do, and she had gone back to work. But the name did not leave her. He was not Victor Ashworth. He was a small, precise man in glasses who introduced himself to the front desk as Mr. Harrison Briggs, executive director of something called the Lagos Urban Renewal Consortium. He collected the portfolio, checked its contents with quick, practiced movements, and left without thanking anyone. Grace was finishing her round on the 4th floor when she saw him in the elevator. He did not see her. She was wearing her uniform and pushing a cart, and people in suits with leather portfolios rarely see women pushing cleaning carts. But Grace saw him, and she remembered his face the way she remembered every face that passed through her floor carefully, without being obvious about it. 2 days later, the letter arrived. It came to her apartment, not to the hotel. That alone was enough to make her hands go still when she held it. There was no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a phone number and 4 typed words. We need to talk. She almost threw it away. She almost threw it away 3 times over the next 2 days. But something, the name Asheginal. In those documents, the word demolition kept pulling at her. She called the number on a Thursday evening after her mother had gone to sleep, and Daniel had finally closed his textbooks. The phone rang twice. Miss Okonkwo, said the voice that answered. It was deep, unhurried, the voice of a man who had never once been rushed by anything. Who is this? Se Asked. My name is Victor Ashworth, the voice said, and I believe you have seen something that concerns both of us. Time is stop it. The world stopped. Grace's hand tightened on the phone. She had heard that name 10,000 times, on the radio, in newspapers, spoken by people at the hotel in tones of mixed awe and fear. She had never imagined it attached to a voice on the other end of her own telephone. What do you want? She said. To meet you, he said. That is all. Just to talk. She said nothing. I will send a car, he said. I don't get into cars sent by men I don't know, she said. A pause. Not uncomfortable. Just surprised. Then choose the place, he said. Wherever you feel safe. I will come to you. She chose the church courtyard near her apartment because it was public, because the security guard at the gate knew her face, and because she had learned long ago that safety was not something you left to other people to arrange. Victor Ashworth arrived in a black car, but he came through the gate alone. He was taller than his photographs. Noti. He sat across from her at the plastic table under the mango tree, as if he sat at plastic tables every day of his life, which she was fairly certain he did not. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Then he said, You are not afraid of me. Should I be? She asked. He almost smiled. Almost. Most people are. I clean other people's rooms for a living, she said. Fear is a luxury I gave up years ago. Something moved in his face, a shift too quick to name. He opened the folder he had brought and turned it to face her. It was a map, and at the center of the map, circled in red ink, was a Tell me, he said, what you know. Grace told him what she had seen. She was precise about it. She had a precise mind, honed by years of noting which guess had left soap in which position. She described the documents. The language she had understood and the language she had not, the name Jagunel, the word demolition. The name Harrison Briggs, Victor, listened without interrupting. That, she would think later, was the first strange thing about him. Men with his kind of power did not usually listen. They waited for their turn to speak. How many people live there? She asked. When she had finished, 400,000, he said. Approximately, she looked at the map. The red circle was large, and the demolition order. "It has not been signed yet," he said, "but it will be, unless someone stops it." Who would stop it? "I would," he said. If I had the evidence to justify intervention. There was something careful in the way he said it. Grace noticed it the way she noticed everything without reacting. Filling it away. "And why," she said slowly, "would you want to stop it? Your name is in those documents too." Victor's jaw tightened. A small movement. "Because Harrison Briggs is using my company's land acquisition infrastructure to run a private scheme. He has been forging my authorization signatures for 8 months. The demolition is not a renewal project. It is a land grab. The consortium is a shell. The land will be sold to a private developer the moment the residents are displaced." Grace was quiet for a long time. The sound of traffic moved beyond the church wall. The mango tree dropped one leaf. "Why come to me?" she said. "You have lawyers. You have investigators. Harrison has people inside my legal team," he said. "I do not know how many. I cannot risk using internal resources until I know the full scope." She looked at him. "So you want a cleaning woman to help you?" "I want someone," he said, "who Harrison Briggs would never notice." 3 days later. Grace walked back into the Continental Hotel for her morning shift and went directly to housekeeping storage. She had a key to every service corridor in that building. She had earned it through 5 years of showing up on time, and whether that would have stopped other people, through knowing every guest's habits, through making herself so reliably invisible that management had stopped noticing when she accessed things. Harrison Briggs was back. He had checked into room 614 the night before. Grace did his room first. She moved through it the way she always did, efficiently, without hurry. She stripped the bed. She wiped the bathroom. She collected the cups from the nightstand. And there, in a leather portfolio he had left open on the desk, because men like Harrison Briggs never imagined that women like Grace had eyes that read, were 3 documents she had not seen before. The first was a wire transfer confirmation, 40 million naira, from an account she did not recognize to another account she did not recognize. The second was a list of names, 12 names, with government titles beside them. 3 of them she recognized from newspapers. The third was a letter. It was addressed to someone called Constance Ashworth. Grace photographed all 3 with her phone, the way Victor had shown her, quickly and without flash. She replaced everything exactly as she had found it. She finished the room. She left. In the service elevator, her hands were completely still. She had learned that stillness was not the absence of fear. It was what happened when you chose your action before your fear could choose it for you. Victor's face, when she showed him the photograph of that letter, was not what Grace expected. She had expected shock. Instead, she got recognition. The grim contained recognition of someone who has been afraid of a thing for a long time and has now been confirmed. "My mother," he said. The word fell between them like a stone in still-watered Constance. Ashworth was 83 years old. She was the widow of Emeka Ashworth, who had been Victor's father and the man who had originally built the land acquisition division of Ashworth Communications before his death 20 years ago. Constance had retired from all board positions 5 years ago, or so everyone believed. Victor made a call. That night they met with a man named Samuel Adisa, 60 years old, soft-spoken, with the permanent slight squint of someone who spent his life reading small print. Samuel had been the company's head archivist for 22 years before he was quietly removed from his position 8 months ago and given a generous redundancies package, and told it was restructuring. Samuel sat in the church courtyard at the same plastic table and turned his teacup around in his hands as if it were the last warm thing in the... "Well, I knew something was wrong," he said, "when I was asked to create a secondary filing system, separate from the main records, physical files only. I was told it was for legacy document management. And Victor and the people authorizing those secondary files were not using your signature, Mr. Ashworth." Samuel They were using your father's old letterhead, old authorization stamps, the kind that were retired 20 years ago. He looked at the table. Someone in that building has very old documents and very steady hands. The silence between the three of them lasted a long time. My mother, Victor said again, quieter this time, as if he were saying it to someone who was not in the room. Victor moved quickly. He hired an external forensic accounting firm, people he trusted because he had selected them himself, before Harrison Briggs had any connection to the company. Within 48 hours, they had traced the wire transfers. The 40 million naira had moved through 4 accounts and had arrived, finally, in a property holding company registered in Constance Ashworth's maiden name. It seemed, for a brief moment, that the case was closing, that the evidence was enough. Victor called his legal team. The 2 members he was certain were clean, and presented the findings. They told him to wait, to compile everything, to bring it to the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission in a controlled submission that could not be easily dismissed. He agreed. He felt, for the first time in months, the particular relief of a man who has been running and can finally see the end of the road. He was wrong about the road. That evening, Grace received a phone call from a number she did not recognize. The voice on the other end was female, precise and cold, the way certain kinds of authority sound, not loud, but irresistible, like water finding the lowest point. Ms. Okonkwo, the voice said, my name is Constance Ashworth. I know what you have been doing, and I know where your mother lives, and I know the name of your brother's school, and I know that you cannot afford a single disruption to either of those things. Grace held the phone. The kitchen smelled of the rice her mother had made for dinner. She could hear Daniel in the next room, the scratch of his pencil. What do you want? I will make it worth your time. How worth my time? Grace sighed, not because she intended to accept, but because she needed to keep the woman talking. 1 million naira, Constance said, deposited tonight. And if I don't stop, Grace said. A pause, long and deliberate. Then I will stop you, Constance said, and you will not enjoy the way I do it. The line went dead. Grace sat at the kitchen table for exactly 2 minutes. Then she called Victor, and she told him everything, word for word, the way she always remembered things perfectly, without gaps. She knows, Victor said. Yes, Grace said. She moved faster than I thought. Yes, Grace said. So we have to move faster than she thought. The picture that emerged over the next hours was older and darker than Victor had imagined. Harrison Briggs had been connected to Constance Ashworth for 15 years, not through business, through family. His mother and Constance had been friends since secondary school. The relationship had survived everything. The death of Emeka Ashworth, Victor's rise to power, the passing of years. It had simply moved underground. Constance had never forgiven her son for one thing. He had built the company without her. After Emeka died, Victor had restructured everything, modernized the operations, professionalized the board, brought in people who answered to merit rather than blood. He had done it carefully, respectfully. He had given his mother generous ownership stakes and a ceremonial title, but she had not been consulted. She had not been in the room. For 20 years, Constance Ashworth had been waiting, and she had been building, slowly, invisibly, using her husband's old networks, his old stamps, his old friends, the deep roots that predated everything Victor had created. The land in nigerian had originally been part of Emeka Ashworth's personal portfolio. When he died, it had passed into the company under Victor's restructuring. Constance believed it should have passed to her. Legally, she was wrong. But the law, she had decided, was simply another door, and doors could be forged. She is not just stealing money, Samuel Adesa said softly when Victor presented the full picture. She is reclaiming what she believes was taken from her. It was not taken, Victor said. His voice was very controlled. It was legally transferred. She does not see it that way, Samuel said. And 400,000 people in nigerian, Grace said. The worst truth arrive last, as it always does. The forensic team found more. Not for accounts. 11. The money had not moved into only one property holding company. It had moved into 6. And the demolition plan was not only 3 other communities, each one sitting on land that could be resold to developers for enormous profit, had been quietly added to Phase 2 of the urban renewal consortium's plan. 1.2 million people. 1.2 million people in 4 communities who did not know that a consortium they had never heard of, authorized with the signature of a dead man, had already assigned their homes a demolition date. Victor stood in the room with that number and said nothing for a long time. Grace watched him. She had been watching him for 2 weeks now, watching him in the careful, unpracticed way. She watched everything, trying to understand what a man like this was made of when you stripped away the suit and the car and the view. What she found surprised her. He was grieving, underneath the controlled anger, underneath the strategic calculations. It was grieving, not just for the betrayal of his mother, but for the 11 years of distance between them that had made this possible, for all the conversations they had not had. She did not say this to him. It was not her grief to name. She simply said, "What is the next step?" And he said, "I face her." Constance Ashworth lived in a house in Ikoyi that smelled of old wood and expensive perfume and a particular kind of silence that large houses accumulate when their original purpose has been hollowed out by time. She had 19 staff members, daily fresh flowers, and a garden that was tended by 3 people whose only job was to maintain it. Victor came on a Saturday morning. He came without calling ahead. He came with Grace. Constance was in the sitting room when they entered. She was a small woman, 83 years old, with skin the color of dark amber and eyes that had not softened with age. They had concentrated, the way heat concentrates in a lens. She wore a wrapper of deep purple, and she sat in her chair with a stillness that was not peace, but dominion. She looked at Grace with a particular kind of contempt, the contempt of a woman who had spent her life believing that some people belonged in rooms and some people belonged outside them. "You brought a servant," she said to Victor. "I brought a witness," he said. First document on the table between them, the wire transfer confirmation. She did not look at it. "Victor," she said, "sit down. Let us talk like family." "We will talk like people who have documents," he said. "The time for family was before you used a dead man's name to displace 1.2 million living ones." For the first time, something moved behind her eyes. Not regret, but calculation, the rapid, experienced calculation of a woman who had been playing a long game and has just realized the board has been. "You don't understand what your father built," she said. "I built what my father started," Victor said, "after he died. For 30 years, I built it. You knew this. You excluded me," she said. The word came out with a heat that surprised him. "From every board meeting, every major decision, you brought in strangers and gave them chairs that should have been mine, your father's life's work. And I sat in the garden. You were offered. I was offered a title," she said, "a ceremonial seat, a bowl of water to wash my hands in while other people ate the feast." She leaned forward. "That land in Egigno belonged to your father, and therefore it belonged to me. It belonged to the company," Victor said. "You're a company," she said, "which you built on your father's foundation, which you built on my sacrifice. 30 years I stood beside that man. 30 years I managed his household, raised his son, hosted his partners, kept his secrets." Her voice did not rise. It simply sharpened. "And when he was gone, what did I receive? A wrapper and a garden." The room was silent. Grace spoke for the first time. Her voice was completely level. "And the 400,000 people in Egypt," she said. "What did they do to you?" Constance turned and looked at her as if noticing, for the first time, that she was capable of speech. "They are in the way," Constance said simply. "They are in their homes. Grace said. They were born there. They will bury their parents there. Their children walk to school through those streets. See, they are not inconveniences. They are people, and you never once thought about them. Business, Constance said, does not think about people. Then it is not business, Grace said. It is cruelty with arithmetic. If this story is moving you, subscribe now. The ending will change how you see everything. Victor placed the second document on the table, then the third, then the list of names with the government titles. He placed each one slowly, deliberately, the way a man lays down something heavy he has been carrying a long time. Harrison Briggs has already been arrested, Victor said. This morning, early. He watched his mother's face. He will cooperate. He has been told, very clearly, what cooperation looks like and what the alternative is. Constance was still. The perfume in the room was very strong. The flowers in the vase on the sideboard were beginning, slightly, to droop. The EFCC has the files, Victor continued. External counsel has been fully briefed. The government contacts on that list, he pointed, have all been contacted through back channels. Some have already removed themselves from the scheme. The rest will be contacted formally by end of week. You cannot, she began. I can, he said. And I have. He looked at her for a long time. The grief in him was very visible now. Not performed, not theatrical, simply real. I would have given you anything you asked for, he said. Anything within my power. You never asked. You simply took, and what you took was not mine to give. It belonged to people who have nothing else. He stood up. The legal process will proceed as it must, he said. I cannot stop that, and I will not try. Constance Ashworth looked at her son, and for the first time in 83 years of a life spent accumulating and controlling and maintaining, she looked like what she was. An old woman who had been alone with her anger for so long that she had mistaken it for righteousness. She said nothing. Flowers continued to droop. Victor and Grace walked out of the house into the Ikoyi morning, where the bougainvillea was blooming, pink and loud against the white walls, and the air smelled of rain that had not yet fallen. The story broke in the press on a Wednesday dot, not because Victor released it, because 3 of the 12 government officials on that list, frightened of what Harrison Briggs might say from inside his detention cell, approached journalists before the formal charges were filed. It was the kind of story that, once it begins moving, cannot be stopped, like water finding its level. It spread across platforms and newspapers and radio broadcasts and the WhatsApp messages of 400,000 people in Ajagino who woke up on Wednesday morning to learn that they had almost lost everything without ever knowing they were in danger. The demolition orders were formally nullified by Friday. The Lagos Urban Renewal Consortium was dissolved the following week. Its assets, what remained of them, were frozen. Harrison Briggs entered a formal agreement with prosecutors. He provided names. The names provided more names. The network unwound in the way these networks always do. Quickly, once they begin, like thread pulled from a loose end. Constance Ashworth was not charged with criminal fraud. Victor made one intervention, and only one. He asked that she'll be allowed to enter a formal civil settlement, the repayment of all diverted funds, the transfer of her ownership stakes in the property holding companies, and a permanent bar from any further involvement in Ashworth Communications or its subsidiaries. The prosecutors agreed. Whether this was mercy or strategy, Victor did not say. But it meant that an 83-year-old woman did not go to prison. It also meant that she sat alone in her house, with her 19 staff, and her garden, and her fresh flowers, and had to live with what she had done, which, Victor believed, was its own kind of justice. Then came the moment that no one had planned for. It was a Saturday. 3 weeks after the demolition orders were cancelled, Victor had arranged, quietly, through the company's community development division, a small gathering in a... Not a press event, not a photo opportunity, just a meeting in the community hall, where residents could hear directly from someone at Ashworth Communications about what had nearly happened and what had been done to prevent it. He had planned to speak himself. But when he arrived, the community leader, a man of 70 with white hair and a straight back who introduced himself as Elder Emmanuel, asked if the woman who had first found the documents could come forward instead. Victor looked at Grace. She was standing at the back of the hall in her good dress, the one she wore to church. Pale blue, ironed carefully. She was not expecting to be called. She shook her head slightly. Please, Elder Emmanuel said. He had a voice like the inside of a church. Let her speak. Grace walked to the front of the hall. She stood before 500 people who did not know her name, who had never heard of her, who had almost lost everything because of documents she had happened to find in a room. She was responsible for keeping clean. She was quiet for a moment. I am a cleaning woman. That is what I do. I clean other people's rooms, and I try to be thorough, because I believe that how you do a small thing is how you do everything. The hall was completely still. The afternoon light came through the high windows at an angle that fell across her face and made her look, for a moment, like something drawn from a story older than any of them. I almost threw those documents away, she said. I want you to know that 3 times I almost did it, because I am tired, because I have a mother who needs her medication and a brother who needs his school fees, and I cannot afford to carry other people's troubles. She paused, but those were not other people's troubles, she said. They were everyone's troubles, and the moment I understood that, I stopped having a choice. She looked out at the 500 faces. You are still here, she said. I do not know if that is enough, but it is something. An old woman in the front row began to cry, not dramatically, just quietly. The way people cry when something they were afraid to lose is returned to them. Then the applause started. It was not the polished applause of a conference or a ceremony. It was the applause of people who meant it, loud and ragged and full of feeling, the kind that fills a room and stays in the walls. Victor Ashworth stood at the back of that hall and felt something shift inside him, something that had been hard for 11 years. For the first time since Addie's funeral, he felt his eyes go wet. He did not look away. 6 months passed. The charges against Harrison Briggs were formally filed and his trial date was set. The 12 government officials involved faced various degrees of consequence to resign. 4 were formally investigated. The rest entered cooperation agreements that would take years to resolve. The machinery of justice is slow, but it had begun moving, and Grace had learned that beginning was the essential thing. Constance Ashworth remained in her house in Ikoyi, had accepted a condition of Victor's settlement that she had not initially been told about, a monthly contribution, drawn from the proceeds of her returned assets, to a community development fund for the 4 neighborhoods that had been listed in the demolition plan. It was not her idea, but it was, Victor believed, the most truthful form of restitution he could arrange. Victor did not visit his mother for the first 4 months. Then, on a Sunday in December, he drove to Ikogi alone and sat with her in the garden she had always maintained so carefully. They did not speak much. He brought oranges. She had always loved oranges, and he had forgotten this, and then remembered it suddenly one morning and stopped at a market on the way. She peeled one slowly with her small, precise hands, and offered him half without looking at him. He took it. That was all. That was enough. For now. Daniel Okonkwo passed his university entrance examinations with the highest score in his examination center. He was accepted to study engineering. Grace told him on a Tuesday evening after dinner. He sat at the kitchen table for a full minute without moving. Then he put his face in his hands and made a sound that was not quite crying and not quite laughing, but lived in the place where those 2 things meet. Their mother, who was resting in the next room, called out and asked what was happening. Daniel passed. Grace called back. There was a pause. Of course he did, their mother said. Victor Ashworth established what he called the Adeas Foundation, named for his wife, which was the thing he had most needed to do for 11 years and had not known how to begin. The foundation funded community health clinics and secondary school scholarships across 5 states. It was not a gesture. It was, Grace thought when she heard about it, the action of a man who had finally located his grief and decided to do something useful with it. As for the dinner, the marble table, the check with $100 million, and her name already written on it, that had been Victor's mistake. He had been trying to solve a problem with what he knew, which was money. He had looked at Grace's worn shoes, and her borrowed dress, and her 2 jobs, and her mother's medication, and he had thought, if I can take care of all of it, all at once, then perhaps she will feel what I feel. He had not understood that Grace Okonkwo did not want to be taken care of. She wanted to be seen. When she pushed the check back, she had said, simply, "You are trying to buy something that is not for sale. And the reason it is not for sale is not that it is too expensive. It is that you cannot buy it at all. What you are looking for, that is not a transaction. That is a choice. And it takes time." Victor had looked at her for a long time across that marble table. Then he had said quietly, "May I have the time?" She had considered this. She had looked at this man, this powerful, lonely, grief-carrying man who had sat at a plastic table in a church courtyard because she had asked him to, and who had listened when other men of his kind would have spoken. "Yes," she had said, "you, mayuscula. Some things cannot be bought. Some things cannot be rushed. Some things can only be earned slowly, quietly, in the space between what a person has and what they choose to become." The man who had everything finally understood what everything meant. Not the penthouses, not the companies, not the watches older than marriages, but this, a woman who would push back $100 million and tell you the truth. That was worth everything. Thank you for joining us for this story. Subscribe to our channel and click the bell so you never miss a story. Watch our next story right here. It is waiting for you.